Good morning. Thank you for joining us in the LearnBox Lounge and welcome. This is the first ever of the LearnBox Lounges, hopefully with many to come. So the reason for starting the LearnBox Lounge, we know that many of you are working from home and some of you are schooling from home as well, which is pretty tough. And generally things at the moment are pretty tough. So often you forget to take a break. So we thought we'd bring one to you. So we thought we'd give you a break and also bring people together. But rather than listen to me, we thought we'd bring someone that you might actually want to listen to, and we have secured the best. Jamil needs no introduction. I've never really understood why people say that, why people don't, nobody needs an introduction. But if I had Jamil's achievements, I think I'd want them thrown down in front of me every time I entered a room. So without further ado, I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction, Jamil. I hope you don't mind. Jamil is one of today's foremost practitioners of performance psychology, and he is an expert in high performance. He's worked with 6 of the world's top #1 sports stars. He ranks amongst the most influential figures in Britain's sport. In 2009, Jamil was voted in the top 100 most powerful men in golf by his international peers. He is one of only a few external psychologists ever to be allowed to study astronauts on the 2008 NASA space program. Wow. He's worked with business leaders and companies in over 24 different countries, helping teams to fulfill their potential by orchestrating change and performance programs. And he's here with us today, the peak of his career. Thank you, Jamil, for being with us. I first met Jamil at a Capita Knowledge Pool breakfast event, probably about 18 months ago, I think. And didn't know who Jamil was. I'm sorry to say that, Jamil, but I was very pleasantly surprised. Jamil turned up with his flip chart and he absolutely wowed an audience in probably about 45 minutes, similar time to what we've got today. It was absolutely fascinating, and I have then gone on to tell people he's the best speaker I've ever heard. I told Jamil that last week, so I'm not just feeding his ego. Hopefully he won't let us down today, though. No pressure, Jamil. But no, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I think it's important to add that when I contacted Jamil and said, look, we're planning on launching a LearnBox Lounge, something that's going to bring people together, force them to have a break as a community. One of the first things I said to him was, I haven't really got any money to put behind this, and I thought he'd probably go, see you later, but he didn't. He was more than happy to do this for us today, so an extra thank you. We are going to send you Jamil's details and at the end of this, his sort of Twitter feeds, social media feeds, but also his website. One, because it's important that you keep up with Jamil because he's quite amusing and he's quite opinionated as well. But also, you may want to book him, and we would highly recommend that. And I'm sure you'll want to do this on the back of today as well, even though he said to me, I don't need to tell you this, but I'm going to anyway. If your business is interested in a motivational speaker, here is the man for you, and you will see why very, very soon. So the plan for today is, me and Jamil had a catch up last week, which he described as a therapy session. I'm not sure what that says about me, but we had quite a bit of fun. We talked about some topics that we're not going to talk about today for lots of reasons, but they were quite inappropriate, and we've got quite similar views on certain things, so we put them in the room 101 for today. But what we decided to do was you're very welcome to ask as many questions of Jamil as you'd like to today through the Q&A feature, and then I'll pick out some of the best questions and fire them over to Jamil, and then he can answer them. We have got Jamil for 45 minutes. He said he's happy to go on longer than that if we need him to. I'm happy to sit here all day. But obviously I appreciate some of you've got work to get to. So if you need to drop off sooner, obviously I'm not your boss. You need to do what you need to do. But yeah, how Jamil left it last week was, you have a think about questions to start things off, and then people can fire their questions in. He made it very clear that there's no question too obscure, and there's no question too personal, I think you said. I might be making that up actually, but yeah, you can send your questions in, and I'll pick the best ones and fire them over to Jamil, and yeah, we'll go from there. And hopefully you've all got your coffee or tea, and you're ready just to have some peace. Even if you've got kids screaming in the background, it doesn't matter. Just enjoy this time and enjoy the break as much as you can. So, Jamil, are you ready? I have got a bit of a question for you to start. Are you ready? Okay, well, I've got a bit of a backstory with my question. So, I'm trying to think when this was. a few years back, I was bought a present by my grandma's sister. And it was a bit of a fancy box from a fancy shop. I won't drop any names, but it was some hand soap and hand cream, and I was like, oh, all right, I'm not that old. Hand cream I've always associated with old people. Apologies to anybody out there that's a big lover of hand cream.
I like hand cream. You
like hand cream? Okay, you might be a little bit older than me. I don't know. But I've always thought it was quite an old person's thing, you know, to the point where there's been times I've been with my mum and she said, have you got any hand cream? And I've gone, no. Do you know how old I am? So anyway, I got this hand cream, and because it was quite fancy, I put it in the downstairs toilet so that all my guests would think like, she's got a bit of money. So I put it in there and let other people use it really, but it wasn't for me. And I've always seen hand cream as very much an old person's gift. But obviously times have changed recently, and mad hand washing going on. I'm not embarrassed to say that hand cream is now the top of my Christmas list, because of all the hand washing. So it's a bit of a long-winded story, but really what I'm trying to get to is, have you ever had a strong view or a stereotype of something that's changed quite suddenly, you quite surprised yourself with? Yeah, that's pretty much it. Over to you, Jamil.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think we probably all have, haven't we? Our problem is that we live by what I call mental tramlines. So a depressing statistic for you, Lucy, is that 40% of what we do is done by habit alone. So next time you do have the opportunity to walk into your office, and you will see people in there who will be writing on post-its. They'll be on the telephone. They'll be writing on whiteboards. Unfortunately, almost half of what they'll be doing will be done for the sake of the fact that they've done it yesterday or did it the day before, or that's how they see their role. So I think that the future demands us to be different, and I think that we need to be more open-minded and agile in our thinking than we ever have been. And I think breaking habits, and this possibly now is a good chance for people to do that. Breaking habits is probably the way in which we can take advantage of the opportunities which will be coming our way in the future. So moving outside of what we believe to be true. And I've done it lots of times. I think as a coach, I think it's really important to be open-minded. Often sit in front of people who, be it in professional sport or in business, who I believe would need one thing in regard to allowing them to be better, maximising their potential, optimising their talent. And with good questioning or with further interrogation or understanding, you've actually found out it's something quite different. There's a nice way to, I guess, get to the bottom, the real reasons on why people make decisions. And that's to ask why 5 times. It's a really nice technique. It's a continuous improvement technique. I remember spending some time in Japan looking at manufacturing techniques. I'm thinking you can turn them into psychological ones, and you can actually. This is one of them. If you ask why 5 times, you will always find out the real reason. You know, and it's really root cause analysis. So engineers use it when diagnosing faults. We can do it when we're understanding someone or understanding ourselves or even understanding our business. You ask why 5 times, you always get to the real reason. Some very clever Japanese professor spent 20 years of his life studying the English language, and he concluded that why was the most important question in the whole of the English language. He wasted his time. Every single 5-year-old on earth already knew that, didn't they? Can I have an ice cream? No. Why? Well, because you've just had one. Can I have another? No. Because it's nearly lunchtime. Why? Because we always have lunch at this time. Why? It's a great question now, isn't it? And this is why so many parents will end up saying, because that's the why, or because I told you so, is because children peel away the layers. And I think it's really important for us to do that. A good example of someone changing, in regard to your question, changing the way in which they saw something was, I did this questioning, good questions with a telecommunications company. And there was a manager who told me that he had someone, one of the people he manages and lead, came up to him and said, can I have more money? And he said, why? Usually there's a fight at this point. Usually they say, no, of course you can't have any money. But he said, why? What would you spend it on? And the guy said, I'd spend it on more holidays. He said, why? I said, well, because I want to go to Thailand. I want to go to India. I want 3 weeks somewhere far off. He said, why? he said, well, and he got quite irate, apparently, got quite angry. He said, well, you know what, I'm really invested in this company. When I had babies, I spent all my time working here. Now I feel as though I've missed out. I want to get to know the children better. I want to spend more time with them. I don't want to go to Spain for a week. I want to go to, India for 3 weeks, get to know them again. And so the manager said, I can't give you more money, but I can move you to headquarters. When I move you to headquarters, it will cut your commute time down by half. I'll give you a day a week with your children by next week. And the guy bit his hand off for it. So he had a belief system, a perception that the chap in front of him wanted more money. By asking why a few times, he actually found out he didn't want more money. He actually wanted more time with his children. So I think that I've probably been surprised lots of times when someone sat in front of me and I believe that they need to go in a particular direction. And I think if you're open-minded, I think if you ask the right questions, then you can find out the right answers. And I think it's really important to know which way people are facing, so you know which way is forwards. Long-winded answer for you.
Why do you think that, Jamil?
Why do I think?
Why do you think that? I'm just being facetious now.
Right.
We've got a question that's come in from my 7-year-old, because I did ask you did say you preferred obscure questions, and one of the best ones you'd ever had was from a 9-year-old.
Yeah.
It's not as good as I would have hoped, to be honest. She wanted to know when was the time that you spoke that you were most nervous, and she also asked which is your favourite Disney film and why.
Okay. A time I spoke most nervous. Do you know, I always think that rapport is really important. So here's a tip for you if you do talks, anyone who does talks and presentations. Whenever I take a brief, I always start by thinking, how do I want the audience feeling at the end of it? I think it's a really good tip, actually. I think that, even if I say so myself, and I think that people will often think about what they need to get across. Think about the content, think about the slides. I always think, how do we want the audience feeling at the end of it? And then work backwards from there. So, because ultimately, it's not just about having good content or being rich in your content. It's really about making sure that people do feel motivated, inspired, have a different mood or different perception in regard to what they're being asked to go off and do in regard to obtaining success over the next 12 months or whatever it might be. So I think it's really important, the starting point. I did a talk in Russia once, so in Moscow, and it was the audience didn't speak English, and then the interpreter was taken sick. So I had to speak for 45 minutes in English with no interpretation, no translation. So it didn't work very well, because that's the most nervous I've been, because I just knew I wouldn't have the rapport. So the content was the same, the content's no problem. It was actually just not being able to make that emotional connection that I usually try to get with the audience. So the most nervous I've been was speaking to an audience of people who were in Russia who didn't speak English. So they just decided to talk amongst themselves whilst I was talking, because it actually made sense for them to do that. And then I used to do stand-up comedy just to test myself. I never did it because I wanted to be a stand-up comedian. I did several things before just to see how I reacted to them. And some of the times I did stand-up comedy was probably the most nervous I've ever been. And then my favourite Disney movie, there's so many. I'm saying, what's the problem? I quite like Moana. Moana's quite good. It's got a strong female lead. They don't usually, Disney do princesses, but I quite like Moana because the girl in it's quite strong, and it's quite uplifting that she's represented in the way which she is. So I think probably Moana at the moment, although I've got a feeling over the next few months that may change. I may be watching more Disney, and so therefore I'll come back to you with a different answer, I'm sure, over the next 3 months.
Okay, yeah, I like your reasons behind that. I'm not really a princess fan myself. Okay, we've got a question from the audience. Who is the most inspirational person you've met or listened to?
Do you know, I always think that the most inspirational people for me are people who are failing and then do well. So I've worked with some people who have got from number 5 in the world to number 1 in the world. And I think getting people from number 3 or number 5 to number 1 in the world is really easy. They're talented and they're good, and they do a lot of the right stuff. When people are 500th in the world, and they're failing, and then they manage to eke out another 5 years of their career by getting to 250th in the world. I think it's really impressive. So a lot of people who I found to be quite inspiring and motivational in regard to the people I've worked with are probably lots of names and individuals who are unsung. So although I've worked with some really good sports people, and people may think that they're inspirational, some of them are just so naturally gifted and talented, it's quite incredible, and then they just work hard at making their talent practically useful. But I guess that some of these people who perhaps don't necessarily have the talent, don't necessarily have the technique, aren't born with a gifted mindset, but work really hard and find something to allow them to maximize their potential, are probably the most inspirational I've ever worked with. In regard to the most inspirational person I've listened to or come across, again, I actually find, although I meet lots of speakers and I hear lots of speakers, I'm never really overly inspired. I think maybe because I'm in that world, I don't listen to them in the same way an audience member would. But sometimes when I've done something for Janssen's Pharmaceuticals or Novartis or something, they'll put a patient on stage. And this patient isn't a guest speaker. There's someone living with something which is incredibly debilitating, and something which is amazingly, living with something which is potentially terminal. And they go on stage and talk for 20 minutes or half an hour to a team of pharmacists or medical engineers, and they're incredibly impressive. And they're incredibly impressive because of the emotional connection they make with the audience, their own personal story and narrative, and the fact that they're living with something so awful, who will stand up and try to make the world a better place by informing and enlightening the people who are going to come up with the drugs. So I think I'm probably, what I'm getting from my answers, I'm probably most impressed by unsung people. Celebrities and stars and politicians never really seem to impress me. I think it's always ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I
think probably you're looking for the name Lucy, maybe. I don't know. I'm getting that feeling anyway.
Lucy Dunleavy, I forgot.
Yeah. That one. Okay.
Flashing up on the screen in front of me. I was wondering why.
Okay. Another question. You seem to be a strong people person. Little do they know. How are you finding isolation? What techniques are you using to stay connected?
Okay, that's a good question. I think there's a few things, actually, probably three things. I think that connectivity is very important, and that's why I'm pleased to be doing this today. So I actually think that I always say that companies don't really compete against companies anymore, and networks compete against networks. And you're only really as strong as your network. Now, there's an internal narrative for you as a leader or an individual in your company. There's an external narrative for your organization in that too. So I only think that networks compete against networks now. And I see that across sectors. I think that our only sustainable competitive advantage is to learn faster and better than your competitors. So therefore, it's all about networks and communities. So connectivity is incredibly important. So social isolation definitely doesn't mean not being able to speak to people. I stay connected. So staying connected is anything from reading books to speaking to people and finding out about the world and communities, and creating a sense of purpose from the network that I have. And so making sure that I'm speaking to people and listening to people, taking in stimulation and provocation, and challenging me to think differently about the current situation. So that's incredibly mentally stimulating. One of the things which is really important at the moment for me is to be motivated by what I'm seeking to achieve rather than be motivated by what I'm seeking to avoid. It's a really interesting and important point that in business anyway. But I think part of what I'm thinking about now is what am I seeking to achieve and create rather than what I'm seeking to avoid. So many people will be thinking about what they stand to lose at this particular time. All that will do is conspire to make you feel bad. We do enough of that anyway. As human beings, we'll often think about what we haven't got, what we should have done, and where are we now. But I'm trying to think about what I can seek to create and achieve in this particular time. And I think that once we're thinking about those sort of things, it's more uplifting, more motivational. Once we start to think about what we're seeking to avoid, and say all it does is really draw us closer towards them. Did you know our subconscious mind never hears the words not or don't? So we'll never ever hear the words not or don't. People you manage and lead will never hear you say those words. Your children will never hear you say those words, which explains a lot, doesn't it? So it's the old one. Don't think of a don't think of a white bear. Don't think of a dog. We need to construct a thought to deconstruct it. That's our problem. So we are drawn towards our most dominant thoughts. Expectation becomes reality. We get what we think about. That's where we need to be careful. So we need to be mindful of what we're thinking at this particular stage. To make sure that we're not drawn towards the things that we don't want to happen. So when you say that, I don't want to go, I don't want to lose this client, I don't want to lose my position in the team, I don't want to lose this pitch, we're actually more likely to get those things because we're not hearing the not or don't bit. We're only really hearing the sentiment and the emotion of not wanting to lose. If you put into Google, do not show me pictures of white bears, it's a perfect example of how our brain works. So we need to be careful. And then the other thing that I've been doing, I guess, in regard to dealing with isolation is understanding the difference between productivity and activity. There's a really big difference between the two. So it really helps to be productive at this stage. There's a technique for you. Here's a tip. What I do, and I sometimes set it as an exercise with people when I was doing workshops and talks and things, is that if you think back to when things were normal, if you were to have only 4 hours a week to work, where would you spend your time? So have a think, imagine that this is all before all this terribleness. If you only had 4 hours a week to work, where would you spend your time? But your metrics are the same. So you've got to achieve the numbers that you were achieving post this current situation. Where would you spend your time? And so have a think about it, and then write it down. Spend 20 minutes or so doing so. Don't break it down into 10 minutes here and there. It's half hours at the most. Sorry, at the least. And then have a look at where your time would be spent. So if you're in sales, you might say, do you know what? I'd spend an hour a week prospecting. I would spend an hour a week locked in my office, looking at market rates, looking at product pricing points, understanding product. I'd spend another hour a week speaking to my direct reports, and I'd spend another hour, doing something else. I don't know, understanding competition. Well, do you know what? If you were prospecting and you only had 4 hours a week to work, that's 25% of your time. So do you spend that now? In regard to working from home, in regard to where you are now, in the context of today, do you spend your 25% of your time doing that now? It's a really nice way to try and understand and gain a perspective on the difference between productivity and activity, and make sure that you're staying productive. So just to recap for me, I think connectivity is incredibly important. Form a community with a purpose. I always say purpose maximization will always drive profit maximization. And in the context of where we are today, I think purpose maximization will still profit you, just maybe in a different way. Maybe not just with a financial context, but just in regard to stimulation, provocation, and having that sense of being. So I think stay connected, be motivated by what you're seeking to achieve rather than what you're seeking to avoid, and make sure you understand the difference between productivity and activity. Help you set realistic expectations with what you can achieve in the current way in which you're working.
Thanks for that, Jamil.
Answers are very long, aren't they? Sorry, try and be a bit more succinct.
It's okay. Just as a sort of side question on what you've just said, because you've just mentioned that people don't hear not and don't, and when you say they don't hear them, I presume you mean they don't hear them in their own heads as well, if they're sort of, your internal.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so whenever we say to ourselves, and this is why people say to themselves, I'm not a smoker, I'm not a smoker, I'm not a smoker, when they're trying to give up smoking, and they actually smoke more. And they're only ever hearing the dominant word of smoking. Just makes you think about it more. So I think what we need to do is so for us as individuals, as human beings, we never hear those words. If we try to move away from these things, we're actually more likely to get them. So we need to be really careful. So if we're motivated by what we're seeking to create and achieve, try and co-author and co-create a future based upon what success looks like with our team members or with our customers or with our families, then I think that we can get through this. It's all about perspective, isn't it? Did I work with a golfer? This golfer had little perspective. So he, I don't know where he was probably 30th in the world or something. So if he lost a tournament, he'd be really depressed. If he won a tournament, he'd be really happy. So I said to him, where do you want to be in the world? And he said, I want to be in the top 5. So in 5 years' time, I want to be in the top 5 in the world. And I said to him, okay then. So if you lose this week, let's say you played the worst golf of your entire life in this tournament this week, could you be top 5 in 5 years' time? And he said yes. I said, if you win this week and you play great golf, could you be top 5 in 5 years' time? He said yes. So the answer to both of those questions is yes. So therefore, it almost proves that creating a particular attitude around either of them is useless. If you win or lose this week, your long-term goal can still be achieved. So therefore, it proves that both results are meaningless in the context of long-term success. I said to him, if you learn nothing from now until 5 years' time, could you be top 5? He said, no. I said, so therefore the emphasis now isn't on winning and losing, is it? It's on how much you learn. And it completely changed the perspective, really, in regard to how he was dealing with the ups and downs of his day-to-day working.
This explains my cream egg addiction, so thank you. I'm hoping I'll be able to get rid of that on the back of what you've just told me. And then obviously different people have different things that motivate them, and I've met quite a few people in business that said they're motivated by fear of failure.
Yeah.
So just on the back of what you said, by just even saying those words out loud, that whole saying not and don't, then they're destined to fail.
No, not necessarily. I mean, I've met people who have been successful, who are motivated by the fear of failure. My only thing, and it's different for different people, but my only thing with this is that if you are motivated by not wanting to fail, not motivated by fearing failure so much, you can be successful. I just don't think the climate to do it in is very nice. It's just not a nice environment, constantly looking over your shoulder for when you might fail. So failure is part payment towards success. The price of success is always paid in full and in advance. It's a really important point, that. So the price of success is always paid in full and in advance. You can't be successful and start making mistakes. So we can fail, it doesn't make us a failure. We can make mistakes, it doesn't make us a mistake. It's really important for us to detach the action from the person, be it ourselves or our team members, to allow us the best learning opportunity. So I think that fear is a useful motivator. We just need to be careful how we use it. And I think that people who operate constantly in a climate of fear may achieve their goals, but I just think it's quite possibly an unhealthy way to do it.
We've got a few more questions coming in now, so I'm going to put 2 together, I think. The first one is, how did you become a speaker? What did you think you'd be doing at this point? And then the next one is, why did you become a speaker? Did you think you were going to be doing this when you were younger, or did you have a different career in mind?
No, it's amazing. I mean, I fell into it. No one goes to university to become a guest speaker. I think what happened was that I went through a whole, without telling you my full life story, it's definitely a road less travelled. I had a series of successes and failures, more failures than successes, that got me here. So I ended up somehow working with some of the best sports people in the world, and that was really through luck, not judgment. It was pure luck. So as a psychologist, I ended up working with some really, really good people. Now, the world of sport at a high level is closely entwined with the world of business. So I remember, I was working with some great golfers at the BMW Open in Munich, and then the head of BMW would come over to me and say, for Europe, and say to me, look, you're working with some of the best golfers in the world. Can you come and talk to my sales team about what they do to be successful? And that's how I ended up speaking. So it was corporate people approaching me almost at sports tournaments, who were involved with sponsoring golfers and footballers and all the corporate stuff that goes alongside professional sport at the highest level. And they're just interested in the psychology of what I do with some of the best sports people and said, can you share it with my teams? So I think if you're a good speaker, what tends to happen is that the vast majority of your work will come through word of mouth. So I did talks, and then someone would go off and tell their wife who worked in another company, or their husband who worked in another company, and say that this guy spoke today. I think you should get him into your sales team or your marketing team or your business. And then before I knew it, I literally looked around at my diary and I was doing more speaking. I talk about my work more than I do my work these days, and I don't know how it came about. So if I looked at my diary, it's just not at the moment, obviously, with the current situation, but it's literally sort of 3 or 4 days a week I speak. To an average audience around 250, and then the other 2 days a week I'm workshops and facilitation, leadership programs and the like. So across sectors and across geographies. And so I just turned around one day and found out I was speaking. So no, I never wanted to be a speaker. I don't know what I would be doing at this point, no idea. My only interest ever has been psychology. It's the only thing I've ever been interested in or good at. But it's definitely a road less traveled. I think I've just said yes to everything. I've ended up being here. So because now the context and the environment is completely different, no doubt I'll go back to speaking, at conferences when, we're allowed to. But it's a good opportunity, I guess, for me to create some time and space and think about what the future looks like in regard to content, what people want to hear. I think it's really important, and here's a little tip again for anyone in business. It's really important to not define ourselves by what we sell, but by what our customer values. There's a big difference between what we sell and what a customer buys. There's an even bigger difference between what we sell and what a customer values. So I think if we can define our proposition and what we offer, not by what we wish to sell, but by what our customers are valuing, then we'll always be future literate and future relevant, no matter how much that changes. So much innovation now comes from outside the sector. And the reason why is because of the curse of incumbency. And the curse of incumbency is organizations were successful doing it a particular way. This is why PayPal wasn't invented by a bank. It's why Skype wasn't invented by anyone in telecommunications, or Spotify wasn't invented by anyone in music. You can't trust the future to anyone who champions the past. The future demands us to be different. So I think that the current crisis, the current context, allows us to reevaluate our proposition and make it even more relevant for the way in which customers, and we can define our customers, clients, however we want, will be wanting to engage with us, be you a learning organization, be you a bank, or be you a guest speaker.
Thanks, Jamil. Just a reminder to everybody else that if you do want to ask any questions, because I've had a couple of messages on my phone, the Q&A in the toolbar, which is just a speech bubble with a question mark in, you just press on that and then ask your questions through there. We have got some more though, Jamil. I've got, actually on the back of what you just talked about, how do you overcome personal and tough challenges or barriers?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Getting personal.
I think for me, it's really important to stick to a sense of purpose. So again, perspective is important, and purpose is important. So I think purpose is never achieved, it's attained on a daily basis. And it's a really important point there. Most people get purpose confused with targets and goals. So if you have targets and goals that will make you successful, well done, that's great. If you've got purpose, purpose is different. In my experience in business and sport, you don't beat someone with purpose. Targets and goals allow you to be successful, metrics, numbers, what a good job looks like. Purpose is a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And I think that when you have that reason to get out of bed in the morning, it's easier to overcome some of the barriers and inhibitors to success. So because you have much more enthusiasm and excitement behind what you're trying to create and achieve. So I think if you chase your passion more than your pension, if your your vocation becomes your vacation, but I think it's much more easier to overcome some of those hurdles. So I think I stick to purpose, which is really important, what we're seeking to achieve. This is exactly why when I say purpose is never achieved, it's attained on a daily basis. And this is why Tiger Woods keeps working. It's why Warren Buffett keeps working. It's why Richard Branson keeps working. Is because they attain this on a daily basis. This reason to get out of bed in the morning. Actually, Tiger Woods is a bad example. He had a good reason to get out of bed in the morning. He had a good one to get back into it in the evening. Let's drop him as an example, Lucy. but my point is, I think purpose is really important. And then there's a lovely little equation, the Covey equation: E plus R equals O. The event plus the reaction equals the outcome. The event plus the reaction equals the outcome. And the event is all the circumstance and situation, all the stuff that pushes and pulls us in different directions on a daily basis. How we react to it will determine the outcome or the opportunity. So we must learn to dance on a shifting carpet, not see the rug being pulled from under our feet. Business and life is a game of continual adjustment, and we need to expect to have barriers to performance. But if we can react and respond in the best way to determine the best outcome or opportunity from it, then all the better. And I'm a firm believer that opportunities are never lost, by the way. I never think that opportunities are lost. I think they're simply found by someone else. Someone else has got the same barriers, be it compliance, governance, regulation, be it marketplace, or technology. They just react and respond different. So I think that two things: put a lot of time into understanding purpose. It gives you more enthusiasm and energy for those barriers and inhibitors. And then E plus R equals O is understand the circumstance and situation that you can't change, but how best to react and respond to these things to determine the best outcome, no matter how small that outcome or opportunity will be from there. So I try and segment and think about what things fit into the event, which things will fit into the reaction or response, and then what the outcome will be from those two things added together.
Thank you. I've had a message through on my phone asking, can you recommend a good motivational book?
Oh, now do you know what? It's funny, really, because people ask me that all the time, and I always give really rubbish answers. And the reason why is that what's motivational to someone is not motivational to someone else. See, I don't really read books on psychology. I'm more likely to read sort of autobiographies or things like that. So, and I find it incredibly inspiring and motivational to read, biographies of people who've been successful, who I admire. So there's I can't remember who said it, and I think they were talking about books. They said that books are like a mirror. If a fool looks in, a fool looks out. So you see what you wish to see in them. So I can't find motivation in all sorts of books, really. But I think having said that, a book which I would recommend for this time is Viktor Frankl, A Man's Search for Meaning. And what's really interesting, I read that, when did I read it? I read it probably 10 years ago, and I just bought it the other week. So Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And it's a really good book for where we are now. And the reason why is that Viktor Frankl is an Austrian Jewish psychiatrist, and he spent the vast majority of his war at Auschwitz and Dachau concentration camps, faced degradation, depravity, inhumanity, barbarism, on a scale that thankfully we can't even imagine. But as a psychiatrist, he studied captors and captives, and then ended up writing the book. Thankfully, he survived, and the book changed the face of psychology. So psychologists believed one thing. When you read the book, it flew in the face of what psychologists believed before the book was written. And the reason why, evidentially, it carried so much weight was because he was living the situation when he wrote it. It wasn't written from experiments or theory. It was written by actually living, in the appalling circumstance in which he did. A couple of interesting points from it is that he said that man can bear anything if it has a purpose. If there's a reason, he found that people who lived longer, I won't spoil the book because, obviously, hopefully people are going to read it. But he found that people lived longer in the concentration camps when they had a purpose to do so. Just be that seeing justice, be that meeting a loved one again, whatever it might be. But he found that people had the ability to endure more when they had that purpose. And then the other thing, which is really interesting, was that psychologists believed in stress situations like that or like this, as in today, and people would turn on each other, and people would be greedy, and people would stockpile or steal. he found out that after the initial flurry of selfish activity, he found out that the context was very different. Psychologists believe that people would steal from each other. That wasn't true. After the initial trauma and people started to form communities and live through this particular circumstance that they were thrown in, he was amazed by how much kindness and community there was. So people were giving their last bit of bread to someone else. So in regard to a bit of an optimistic note for the future, is that no matter what we saw initially with the current crisis, and where we are now and where we could be in the future, we'll be seeing communities and networks come together more, and people being more altruistic in the way in which they behave.
Thanks, Jamil. We've got a few more questions that have come through. One of them, what's the toughest sector or group of people that you've worked with?
That's easy.
Don't say LearnBox.
No, banks and utilities are really hard. And the reason why banks and utilities are really hard is because the curse of incumbency. So they've been doing things successfully for a long time. And that's part of the problem, isn't it? Is that many of these organizations will think to be more successful in the future, they need to pedal faster, become more efficient, become more effective. That's not true. It's a much more of a case of thinking differently to do differently to allow success to take place in the future. So organizations which are born for success in the 20th century, by definition, are bred for failure in the 21st. It's not change catching organizations out, it's the pace of change which is catching organizations out. And so if you're as unwieldy in your culture and your organization as many financial organizations or utilities, it's really hard to make a turn. It's really hard to become agile and open-minded, future relevant and future literate, because of the curse of bureaucracy, officiousness. So at the moment, communities are outperforming bureaucracies and hierarchies when it comes to maximizing human talent, human capability. So many organizations need to form communities based around a purpose, not organizations and institutions based around profit and shareholder value. And I think that many banks and utilities are struggling to get their heads around that one at the moment. I was having a beer with a friend of mine, Mark, and complaining about a bank. I was doing a cultural change program in the bank, trying to get people to think more future relevant and future literate. Think about not defining themselves by what they wish to sell, but by what customers value. And it was really hard work. So I was having a pint of beer with my friend Mark, and he said to me, he said, Jamil, he said, it's very difficult to get someone to understand an idea when their salary depends upon them not understanding it. And it's a very, very good point. And if you've been in banking for 20 years and you've been incredibly successful, why on earth now would you want to change it? So it's almost counterintuitive to say to organizations, you need to give up what's allowing you to be successful now to allow you to be successful in the future. So it's a really hard thing for people to get their heads around when there is this habitual thinking and habitual doing within certain sectors. We're not seeing organisations being wiped out at the moment. We're seeing whole sectors being wiped out at the moment, and this is why it's so important to create a level of agile thinking and open-mindedness. The only way in which we create new possibilities and opportunities is by creating new perspectives. To see the same evidence with a different lens.
Thank you. I've got quite an interesting question that I'm going to read verbatim. You look very similar to David Tennant, my favourite doctor. If you had the ability to travel in time, where would you go? And why?
He's a very good-looking boy, David Tennant.
You think so?
I usually get mistaken for Brad Pitt, so this is an interesting one. This so why are you laughing? If I could travel back in time, do you know what? I would travel back to the late 70s, early 80s. And the reason why is because music was at its finest then. That's what I would do. So I go to the late 70s, early 80s, and I would probably spend all my time going to concerts and listening to really good music.
I presume Rick Astley is up there.
You can see the poster in the background. That's not fair. That's not a guess. It's only because you can see the poster. So no, Rick Astley wouldn't be on the list. Not Duran Duran or Spandau Ballet or any pop music.
Okay. If you had the power to change anything in the world right now, what would you change?
Oh, it's so easy, isn't it? It'd be something to do with a vaccination. If a vaccination was readily available now, it's very second. If I was being practical, I'd say more testing. If it was just something where I could wave a magic wand, I'd say vaccination. If everything could just return back to normal, I'd be really happy. You know, I sometimes think there must be, you know, every single newspaper editor in the land must want to wake up one morning and just think the internet was a big bad dream. But I'm now thinking that every single person, you know, in this world at the moment just wants to wake up and think that all of this is just a big bad dream. So I think if a vaccine could become available immediately, that would be amazing. If I was to think about something else, if I could make a change, I'm always really concerned about divisiveness. I thought Brexit was divisive, and I think politics was divisive. I don't like the idea of isolation and separation, be that between people, communities, or countries. I wish that we could all just think, you know what, it's all a bit crap when we're isolated, be that as a country, as a community, as an individual, and just get together more. So big group hug coming for every single person in the world would be amazing. And when we all just agree to shake hands and get on and not fight over all sorts of things which are irrelevant to mankind, that would be great.
Just on that note, just to point out to people, it's not okay to shake hands still at this moment.
Yeah. I'm not advocating doing that. I don't want to hug anyone at the moment, but no. This is fine for me at the moment. I am a hugger, by the way, but you know, I've been put off myself with recent developments since January.
I think that was a really nice answer. I think it says a lot about me as a person that I was actually thinking while you were speaking that if I hadn't have used the beautiful hand cream and hand soap, I could have sold it for a fortune if I could go back in time. That says more about me than it says about you.
Do you know what though? I mean, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because I think the companies and individuals and leaders who will benefit from this, and please be mindful how I mean that, but are the ones who have got a sense of community, the ones who do the right things. It's amazing how many people are being called out on Twitter at the moment for either treating their staff like shit, you know, or for making poor decisions in regard to their customers, and those who are genuinely signing up to help, you know. And I do think that, you know, I've already decided to buy more stuff from Leon, you know, because of their commitment to give their foods and kitchens over to the NHS. I've never walked into a Wetherspoons in my life, but I definitely won't be doing so, and I'll be encouraging people not to. So it's just interesting how I think in crisis situations you see people and organisations for how they really are. I think it's really easy to be a particular way when you're winning. It's hard to be a particular way when you're losing. So, you know, when things aren't great, it's very easy to make poor decisions. So I think that it's really interesting to see those who are stepping up with, again, probably a sense of purpose, probably an understanding of what they can contribute rather than what they can get.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think it's important to mention we have gone slightly over time, but we have got some more questions if you're okay, Jamil. I know some people may have to leave, I don't know, but if you're all right for me to carry on with this.
I'm happy to do the questions as long as there's an audience there. As long as people haven't just fired a question over and then gone.
Oh, no, the people. I'm still here. I'm fascinated. There's some great questions. Okay, right, done that one. Have you found with the people you've worked with, their drive, goals or purpose change a lot when they have children?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's funny actually because people think that people will be less motivated career-wise when they have children. So I don't want to lose my drive, don't lose my ambition by having kids. And that isn't the case. Some people become more motivated by it, don't they? You know, you've got more to achieve, more to get, and you know, more to be when you've got kids. And you know, sometimes people will think that it won't change me, and it does. So, so I do think that children are a brilliant perspective bringer. Yeah. That's what I found, and I think that again, things change when our labels change. If you become a manager, it's amazing how many people become a manager and they say, now that I'm a manager, I need to do this. Now that I'm a manager, I need to be more like that. And in a way, it's ludicrous, isn't it? So, you know, you become an older brother, or you become a dad, or a husband, or a wife. And now that I'm that, I need to be like this. And it's quite incredible how many people just adopt a label, you know, and then try and become it. But I think that great success comes from self-awareness and personal introspection. I always say that for people who don't like personal introspection, they should take a long, hard look at themselves. It's very, very important. So I think that it doesn't matter about the label. It's more about open-mindedly understanding what it is that allows us to be successful. And I think that the problem we make is that we often will define success by a comparative or comparison. So I think that we'll compare ourselves to our neighbour, we'll compare ourselves to someone we went to school with, family member, someone we sit opposite in the office, you know, to. But success is not a comparison to others. Success is the continued accomplishment of goals which are personal to the individual. So it's never much about how much we can achieve in the context of someone else or comparison to someone else. It's what we are capable of. And I don't necessarily believe that children changes that. You know, I just think that we need to be more inward in our thinking in regard to what success looks like and how we think we can get there. I've met a lot of very successful people who have spent a number of years climbing a particular ladder, got to the top, and then realized it was the wrong ladder. You know, they become number one in the world at their sport, but they've got, you know, a string of divorces, children on drugs, all sorts going on. And I think that success needs to be rounded, and we need to get in picture of that and understand what we need to do to achieve success in all the areas which are important to us, one of which may well be children.
Thanks, Jamil. That's fascinating. Okay, got some little bit more random questions now. First one is, do you have any thoughts on 5G?
I've lots of thoughts on 5G, AI, AR, blockchain, nanotechnology, 3D printing. All are interesting disruptors, but isn't it interesting how all of them are paled into insignificance with the, you know, with nature's disruptor? It's incredible, isn't it? And these are all being debated, no doubt, in strategy conversations all over the world, you know, and now they've paled into insignificance, a bit like Brexit. So it's incredible how it dominated our lives, you know, and now is almost on the back burner in regard to our thinking. In regard to 5G, I think that I think technology is only ever as good as humans use it. So I've seen the best marketing plans, I've seen the best IT transformations literally gather dust because of people's, you know, lack of willingness to engage with it to achieve something purposeful. So I'm a bit worried about over technology with 5G and doing things for the sake of doing them. I think everything which is customer centric, focused on being future relevant by satisfying customer needs, is useful. 5G will provide that if it's used in the right way. So technology is not enough, talent is not enough. It's really about making sure that we can engage with new technologies in a way which are meaningful to customer.
Thank you. We just had a new question come in. Any person, past and present, you would have liked to work with?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? But you know what? I would love to have worked with Muhammad Ali. Not that he would have needed my help. His thinking was incredible, and I've never used a psychologist, and probably never read a book on psychology. I don't know, but was amazing. So Muhammad Ali is my #1 all-time sporting hero. So I would love to have worked with him, and then. I would quite like to, I'd like to work with people who at the moment are achieving things through a great sense of purpose. So Tom Shoes, founder, would be someone that I would love to work with. Tom Shoes are an amazing business. They've gone from nothing to amazing success overnight. They have a buy one, give one policy. So if you buy a pair of Tom Shoes anywhere in the world, they will give a pair of Tom Shoes to someone who doesn't own shoes. So if the CEO of Tom Shoes walked in, you know, to your office today and you said, "Oh, what do you do?" He'd say, "I'm in the business of saving lives." He defines himself not by what he sells, but by what the customer values. So there's kids all around the world at the moment who are queuing up to work for Tom Shoes because of its sense of purpose. They won't choose to work for RBS or someone like that. And I've just pulled that name out the hat, but because it's Tom Shoes which is making the world a better place. I sat in at a Tom Shoes sales meeting in California. I don't know, whenever, a year and a half ago, and the sales director said that, look, guys, I think last quarter we probably saved around 6,000 lives. And he said to his sales team, I think we can save 7,000 lives in the next quarter if we do this, that, and the other. So you have a sales guy standing up and talking about saving lives where people walk into hospital and all sorts of things like that, rather than standing up and talking about shareholder value, income, market share, margin, revenue, things that don't motivate us and excite us. So I think that supporting individuals and entrepreneurs who are making the world a better place through this sense of purpose and community would probably be the people I'd love to work with moving forwards.
It sounds good to me. I know some of the things that you were touching on then. I know I've been accused of them being sort of trying to think what the exact phrase was, something about a warm fuzzy sort of apple pie, I don't know, mother's apple pie or something like that. But for me, that's what excites me, and they're the things I want to talk about. And I often get sort of shouted at maybe a little bit for not talking about the right things when I think they are definitely the right thing to be talking about. Anyway, not about me. I'd pick Mandela. I've got another question coming through from Scott. Hi there. How do we move as a group of citizens and business professionals from hunkering down and trying to make the best of it to developing our skills or learning new ones to be better positioned in the future, providing better services? Good question, Scott.
It's a good one. Do you know what? I think, again, it's about staying connected. The only way in which we realise the current environment and context in which we're living is to get a rounded view and feedback on that current context. So I did a lot of work at Hewlett-Packard, and Hewlett-Packard would often say, if Hewlett-Packard knew what Hewlett-Packard knows, we would be 3 times more successful. And it's basically the notion that we could share knowledge in a different way and create a new asset class by making that knowledge work harder for us. So I actually believe that the way forward is not necessarily about what you know, and which is important. It's more about how you think about what you know. So gaining a better level of knowledge and understanding, but then thinking about it in the context of what we could create for others. So we are a social species. We feel better when we are contributing, when we are making other people's lives better. When do you feel most alive? Is it when you're writing out your to-do list? No, it's when you help a neighbour move house. It's when you help your child learn something they couldn't get their heads around. It's when you help a colleague because they can't get out at lunch, so you pick up their sandwich for them. This is what makes us feel better as human beings. So we need to be connected to feel better. We need to form communities based around a sense of what we can achieve and create together. And I think co-authoring and co-creating that future is where it's at. Actually having honest conversations about what we can do to be better together. Strategic alliances, networks, partnerships, on the understanding that we can be better through mutually beneficial, sustainably successful relationships. So what does that look like? I think first it starts at being agile and open-minded, not being wedded to one mindset, but questioning our belief system, what we believe to be true. There's never been a better time to challenge what we believe to be true. People will have a certain viewpoint of customers, they'll have a viewpoint of pricing points, they'll have a viewpoint on their colleagues, they'll have a viewpoint on new technologies, have a viewpoint on the competition. Whatever we believe to be true is probably wrong. So in regard to our belief system, we always prove ourselves right, even when we're wrong. We need to move away from habitual thinking and try and create a new perspective around the world in which we're living. So it starts with open-minded and perspective. Then it goes into being connected, talk to people, get feedback from people, have communication, and share knowledge. And then it comes about thinking about what people who would interact with your organization, what they would want from you, and then providing something relevant. So it's all about working back from the value point, I guess, and the value point is where a customer meets your organisation. And so if we can think about what it is that creates most value by having this more rounded knowledge and then thinking about how we use the knowledge, and I think that we can provide something which is real and meaningful in the future.
Thanks, Jamil. Just another question from Duncan. In this tough time, I've seen so many people using platforms such as Skype, Zoom, Teams, etc., that I've never previously heard of or used them before. Do you think more of the population will now strive to work more remotely moving forward?
I don't know. Do you know, after the SARS epidemic in 2003, there were more events than ever before. And so I was speaking to a booker, someone who books me, an agent, to do talks, and she said the best year she ever had was 2003 after the SARS epidemic. All these people working remotely who, again, as a social species, want to come together. So as soon as people could get back in their offices, they wanted to do team building, they wanted to get together, they wanted to be connected again. So when you think about concerts, you think about exhibitions, you think about the events that I speak at, the sales kickoffs and whatever else, I think that people will understand that you can do more remote working. They will understand that you can use webinars and Zoom, WebEx and Zoom and things like that. But I still think people will want to get together. It's what we do as human beings. It's what we've always done as human beings. So I think there's going to be a interesting blend. So events won't die and personal connectivity and meetings won't die, but people will probably use the online offerings and platforms in a more efficient and effective way. There'll probably be more acceptance of home working, but I don't think that we will all move to remote working. I'm not sure any of us are happy just sat here in the office, working in isolation, no matter how connected through a screen we can be. So I do think that's going to be an interesting blend between the two. I think that, ultimately, when WebEx and these things, when virtual conferencing appeared, many people in the event space said, well, that's the end of events. They're going to save on travel budgets. People don't need to fly anywhere. Events won't take place. But that didn't happen. We've had virtual conferencing now for a while, and yet, there's still more events than ever. So I think the events industry will come back. And I think it's better positioned to use maybe some of the online offerings to allow learnings to exist pre and post event.
Okay, we've got another one coming in. Real estate and supply chain processes, where do you think the biggest changes will be in the global economy post COVID-19? I've said the C word, I wasn't going to do that. I've just got a lemon pip in my mouth. I've got I put lemon in my water and there's a pip in it. Okay, but if you could predict the future and tell us where you think the changes will be and where we should
you can't predict the future, but you can be ready for it. And I think that in regard to supply chain, it's an interesting one. I think that things will come back, but they come back slowly. And I think what will happen is that we'll probably see some strange bedfellows, people who don't usually connect and get into bed to provide services and products. We're seeing that at the moment, actually. EasyJet stewards and cabin crew being used as because they've got first aid training used by the NHS. Would you have ever thought that would happen? So I think that supply chain will manage because of the network and connectivity and hastily put together alliances, which we're seeing at the moment. We'll also see more, I believe, more local, more community working. So I think, unfortunately, in regard to my previous point, I do think at first we'll be almost more isolated. I think that, in England, I think the supply chain will really be, or movement of goods and services will really be just, almost isolated to this country. But, and the same across Europe and maybe further afield. So that's why we're seeing that in the moment in China a little bit, aren't we? That China almost has a lockdown more for people coming into the country, more so than for citizens of the country. So, I really genuinely don't know. My guess is that supply chains will come back slowly to be more efficient, more effective, but do so through some interesting combinations. And I do think that we'll probably travel and work more locally for a bit, until there's more confidence in being able to go other places.
I suppose what we do know is that the airline staff that will be now working to support the NHS, they will leave a lot of redundant whistles, which I personally think should be shared with parents in these circumstances.
Yes, yeah. Do you know what? I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? You look at 9/11, and you know, literally in the 18 months following 9/11, every single one of the world's major airlines lost as much money as they have made in collective profit since their inception. It's a phenomenal fact. It's incredible. But you know, after 9/11 and terrorist attacks, the fastest growing religion in Texas, that's President George Bush's home state, and the fastest growing religion in Texas after the 9/11 attacks was Islam. We've seen some really, really strange stuff that happens as a result of these shocks. So, so it's quite unpredictable. But ultimately, as a world, you know, we do come together. You know, when you look at the destruction to the airline industry after 9/11, we still had a airline industry after that. We'll have an airline industry after this. So there's, you know, people didn't think we'd have recruitment when LinkedIn came out. Recruiters now use it to their advantage. It's a useful tool for recruiters now. So I think we're incredibly resilient, and I think that many sectors are. So I think it'd be interesting to see, you know, how people choose to survive and the decisions they make to do so. So this is not what we're seeing now in regard to economics is not because models are broken. So, you know, when there's a property crash, for example, it's because the model was broken. At the moment, property is depressed, but that's not because the model is broken. It's the environment in which property is operating. So many models that we were organized by and operating in were actually successful. You know, this is something extraneous to the model. So therefore, it should be accepted that they will come back, maybe just, let's say, modified.
Thanks, Jamil. I appreciate we've gone well over time. I have got one final question, if you don't mind. It's actually from me. Jurgen Klopp is my favourite leader for lots of reasons. Who is your favourite leader, and what qualities do you think are necessary for a fantastic leader?
Okay, who's my favourite leader? That's a really good question. I never thought about it before. I know lots of leaders.
And if you wanted to throw my name in there, that's fine. That's fine.
Because, you know, it's funny because, and again, you know, I bet you there's some amazing leaders who don't have the title of leader, isn't there? You know, there's some amazing people in organisations and in teams who, you know, take the opportunity to lead, you know, even though they don't have it in their title. So I've probably been impressed by some people who, you know, I've worked with and seen, who aren't probably the main stakeholder. But in regard to leadership, I totally understand why Jurgen Klopp would be good. And in fact, you know what, I probably concur. You know, what I know of him at the moment is that, you know, he's led extremely well. I think that he's led extremely well, not just because of his technical ability to understand the game and no doubt motivate the people, but I think he's made some really good decisions outside of the pitch as well, hasn't he? So he supported Liverpool with by not giving interviews to The Sun. He has said that this at the moment is bigger than football, and on the verge of a league title. So I think the lesson to be learnt for a leader is that, you know, leadership doesn't come from your high technical expertise. It comes from the things that you do outside of leading, outside of your role, responsibility and job title. And maybe that's why Klopp scores so highly. So I think that high technical ability or high technical knowledge is no longer as valuable as it used to be. So I'm sorry to tell leaders who rely on high technical expertise that, but high technical expertise is no longer as valuable as it used to be because we can Google things. That's why. So again, knowing a lot isn't necessarily important. It's not necessarily about imparting ready-made knowledge, which allows you to lead well. I guess it's the emotional connectivity, human capability that you have, the ability to be agile and flexible in the way in which you manage and lead and understand situations. I guess it's the human stuff which makes you which completes you as a leader. So I think that good example, Klopp. I agree with you on that, and agreeing with you because of not just because of the league title, but because of maybe some of the things I've read and seen outside of football.
Yeah, especially with the sun. I'm sure. Okay, well, that brings us to a close. Can I just sincerely thank you again on behalf of everybody, particularly on behalf of LearnBox. We really, really appreciate your time today, Jamil, and you've given that so willingly, so thank you. And I know we've kept you longer than we should have done, really. But thank you. We have got your details on the screen at the moment, and we are going to send them out to everybody on the back of this. So if anyone wants to get in touch, or they can follow you on social media, they will do. We are going to run future LearnBox lounges, and we're hoping to do that on a weekly basis. So keep looking at the LearnBox pages, and you'll find out what's going on there as well. But again, thank you, Jamil, and I wish you all a very great day. Thank you. Take care.
See you later.
Bye-bye.